Everybody in? Is everyone here? Hello, everybody. This is a really nice, small, intimate gathering, actually. So, hello, and welcome to you all here and everybody online as well, who I believe are watching. And welcome to today's event, which is Banishing the Sunday Night Blues, although I'm quite keen to know if anybody had the Monday night blues last night, seeing as it's now Tuesday morning. However, cast your mind back to Sunday night and whether you were feeling bluesy. But this event is brought to you by Channel 4, Investors in People and the University of Exeter Business School. Today we're going to be exploring the latest findings from the University of Exeter into the main causes of the dreaded Sunday night blues, which we all remember anyway from being children in school. And it still seems to be here now that we are adults. And ultimately, the point of this research is how you can support yourself and those people around you to make work a little bit more bearable. With us today, we have Professor Ilke Inçoğlu. I hope I've got that right. We've had such a long time talking about how to get your name right. From the University of Exeter Business School, who will shortly be presenting the latest findings from their research, before Paul Devoy from Investors in People and Kirsten Ferber from Channel 4 join us for a wider panel discussion. There are going to be opportunities to ask questions just at the end of the panel discussion. So whether you're watching online or here today, I mean, we're a small group, please feel free to ask away. That is why we're here. But I think now it's time to welcome to the stage Ilke. Thanks, Ilke.
Thank you, Anna. So, well, I'll dive straight in. Our research team, thank you, everyone. And I would also actually say thank you to our advisory panel, Ed Watkins, Paul Farron here sitting to my right. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to talk you through initial findings. So this is a research program still in progress. And I really want to bring the Sunday night blues to life with our preliminary findings from the qualitative research. We'll start with this quote. Down at the prospect of going back to work, worried about volume which will hit me tomorrow. Does that resonate with anyone? Oh, some people are already putting their hands up. So the government launched some statistics in October. This was on Mental Health Day, basically quoting figures that 7 in 10 Brits experience the Sunday night blues regularly. So in this project, and I think, Kirsten, you're going to say more about how we started working on this together, where we are coming from is really looking at it from a work perspective. Of course, there are elements to it that are really related to how individuals think, approach their work, but there's also a big work element. And so we're coming from this perspective in order to create a toolkit to support employees, managers, HR directors, and CEOs to, well, we hope at some point banish or hugely alleviate the Sunday night blues. So I'm going to move on and present you with another quote. So these are from interviews we conducted with people from organizations. And as you can see, it's a quite individual experience. But there are common themes that we found. For instance, this one, Sunday never feels like a day off. There's always too much preparation for the following week. So even when we speak to people who say they don't experience the Sunday night blues, they say, Sunday night seems to be the most unpleasant day of my week. Then this one, Sunday to Monday is a tough transition mentally. And what I find so fascinating is what exactly is it in this transition that makes it so tough? And what is this Sunday night time thing that somehow amplifies people's thoughts and worries? So the objectives of our research project are to really understand what is the experience of the Sunday night blues, what does it feel like, What are factors that contribute to it? What is the impact on work and non-work? And then, as I mentioned, to develop a toolkit to help employees, managers, HR directors, and CEOs to banish it. So this phenomenon, we discovered, requires really a multi-method approach. So we started with interviews, a survey. We're now running focus groups to look into what is it that managers, employees, and HR directors would find helpful. What would be barriers in using a toolkit? Because we want to make it very practical. So this is all still in progress, but I already want to share some insights with you. So what does it feel like? Here are another couple of quotes from our participants. I just starting to feel stressed already, even though you are not back in the workplace. Basically, it's a preoccupation with work before work has actually started. Here's another quote. It's as if your mind starts to turn from what is generally either relaxation or enjoyment at the weekend into worries about everything you've got to do in the working week ahead. So the general themes that came out of our interviews were, it's a range of feelings and thoughts, anxiety about the week to come, feeling nervous, feeling dread, as I said, preoccupation with work, also specific events, thinking about projects, thinking about meetings, maybe thinking about interactions with difficult people at work. And often also the thought of not having done enough, not being ready for the week, unfinished tasks. Self-doubt, imposter syndrome, confidence decreases. Can I do my job? Am I good enough? And some people reported not sleeping well. So one really fascinating finding was that it is not simply low job satisfaction. So people who are really passionate about their job, they love doing what they do, they get it too. So what are the factors that contribute to it? Here is another quote. It's the dread of, I didn't quite get everything done the previous week that I wanted to, and you were able to ignore that on a Saturday. But just remember the mountain to do this that will hit you on Monday and trying to resist the temptation to think about it too much. You can already see that people are a little bit stuck in a loop. They're resisting the thoughts, but they also don't know whether to actually then start working on something or to enjoy their weekend. And we know there's a lot of research that so Ed and Paul have actually done and developed tools where this worrying loop actually makes you feel anxious. Unfinished tasks contribute to it, high workload and a busy week ahead, firefighting, not being able to focus on core tasks. Other work-related factors. Some people mention the expectation, for instance, to respond to email over the weekend. And we will discuss emails in a bit more details. But for instance, receiving emails on the weekend while you're already thinking about work kind of seems to make the worrying loop, I see people nodding here, a bit worse. And generally a lack of work-home boundaries. Very few people, this was something that I found fascinating too, some people said there are very few people I see who are role modeling how you actually keep the boundaries. For instance, other people in my team or managers. And challenging meetings. These could be meetings where you have a meeting with a difficult client, someone who you find is not very energizing. But one thing people also mention is, for instance, soul-destroying operational meetings on a Monday morning. Especially those where you or someone has to prepare reports which are being presented on a Monday morning. What are the individual factors? I'm just giving 2 examples here because we know from a wealth of research that there are also differences in how people respond to thoughts and their tendency to have repetitive thoughts and to worry. But some themes that came out here are self-imposed expectations, ambitions, and interestingly also a lack of assertiveness. So not being able to, or feeling you can't say no to a new project, which is especially hard when people are very passionate about their job and there's a new project coming their way. Their manager or the senior management has another idea for a project. Very difficult then to say no. So how can we banish it? What can employees do? Here's some very practical tips. And you might think, oh, but these are not new. But I think one takeaway here is to maybe think about these actions in a more, intentful way in relation to when you do feel down on a Sunday night. Physically moving, so these kinds of feelings probably come when I'm just stationary for a period of time, that your mind then just kind of wanders off into the kind of abyss. So activities to switch off, such as physical exercise, socializing. I just realized I didn't actually use the slides, but I think you're just about able to follow me. And I think the intent is quite important in that having a plan for a Sunday night might make a difference. So intentionally planning for activities that take your mind off things and where you do something that is fun. Talking to someone, some people found that helps, talking to family, friends. Now here we are moving on to the double-edged sword of working on Sundays. Some people said, rather than thinking about work and emails, they like to start working on emails to get on top of things, to be prepared, to start this Monday morning with a sense of control. So it's a double-edged sword in that you might then realize it's hours later, you are not kind of present with your family and partner, for instance, and you actually don't manage to switch off. But if you don't start working on the emails, you might just fight the thought of maybe wanting to start. One recommendation here was, if you must work on emails, really time limited. People who found have tried out several things that don't work on Sundays. If you can afford not to work on a Sunday. What can managers do? Here are a couple of quotes from our participants. General respect for boundaries of work and home life, which is just really important now that we're in a hybrid situation. And managers can help through the way they manage Friday afternoons and weekends. If someone gives you a lot of work on a Friday afternoon, you're going to have a more stressed weekend because you're not going to finish it. That seems to be quite obvious, but again, here is intention and being aware of what you do as a manager. Here are a few other practical tips. Reshape Monday mornings and Friday afternoons. Discuss with your team how you run your meetings if you have to, at the beginning of the week. Can it be a Tuesday? If it's a Monday, what type of meeting? Try to keep Friday afternoons clear. Have one-to-ones, progress meetings on a Friday. There's nothing hanging over your team over the weekend. A quick check-in. Offer support. Be the type of manager people feel they can talk to. And quite importantly, also know the places that you can point to where your team can find support, for instance, for mental health support. And I think this is one very neglected area. Be mindful of your own work stress and ask for help if needed. Set clear work-life boundaries both for your own benefit and set an example for your team. So managers need to look after their health and well-being too, in order to role model, but also because they need to be, of course, healthy and not being well affect decision-making and how lead their teams. Next steps. This was a quick insight into what we found in the interviews. A big thank you to all the participants who openly discussed this. Next steps, we are continuing with the research program. We're piloting the tools that we are developing, and we are also opening up the discussion with other organizations because it really seems to resonate with a lot of people. And investors and people are going to run focus groups with their networks, or rather my team. Here are a couple of dates, so if you are interested in contributing to developing a toolkit, please get in touch. Thank you. I think we are on to the panel.
Thank you. Thanks, Kirsten and Paul. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. I love the fact that you explained it so beautifully, and then we caught up with the slides afterwards as well, so we could...
It's a slide test.
Exactly, of whether we're awake and whether we're doing it. Thank you. Can I welcome to the stage as well Kirsten Ferber and Paul Devoy as well. Let's start with you, Kirsten, actually. If you can explain a little bit of what you do at Channel 4.
Right, what do I do at Channel 4? I'm the people director at Channel 4.
What does that sounds exciting.
So everything to do with people, and a little bit of context, I suppose, for this is my background is media, HR roles, but what I'm really passionate about is creating environments where people can be themselves. And that is such an important thing, so that's why I do my job.
First of all, before I go to Paul, I'm just going to ask anybody here, do you feel like you can be yourself at work? If anybody can put their hand up for me.
Wow.
Really?
Wow.
That's fantastic. That's amazing. Well, in that case, you're doing your job very, very well as well, and leading the charge. Paul, tell me what you do at Investors and People.
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of Investors and People. I led the buyout of Investors and People from the government in 2017. If anyone ever asks you to buy something off the government, run away as quickly as you can. I wouldn't advise it on anyone else. We're a social enterprise, so we're a not-for-profit organisation, and our purpose is to make work better. And we do that by helping organisations have higher standards for how they manage their people. And our ambition is that 1 in 10 people will work in an Investors and People accredited organisation.
Fantastic. Thank you. I have to ask you straight away, and off the back of that research there as well, Ilka, you are senior personnel, you are leaders in your field. What does Sunday night mean to you? So, Ilka, I'm going to start with you. How do you manage your Sunday night?
So I think a lot of it in the research resonated with me. So definitely thinking about work, getting ready for the week, also as not very unusual for academics, doing work. So
when it comes to walking the walk and talking the talk, are you still getting stressed on a Sunday evening before work?
It's more a feeling of anticipation.
Yes.
And that it does raise I guess it's adrenaline. It's not getting stressed in terms of I don't want to go into work, because I also have lovely colleagues. I love what I do, but it's thinking already about what's going to come and unfinished tasks. So thinking about the unfinished tasks or actually working on them. So I'm a terrible example when it comes to developing this toolkit.
More work to do. Kirsten, how does your Sunday evening look?
Well, it's sort of afternoon, if I'm honest.
Really?
So I go, we're nearly close to the end of the weekends and we're relaxed, and now we're going to be thinking about Monday and what time do we need to get up and what am I going to be doing and what's the week going to hold, some positive things and things that, maybe are going to be a bit challenging. So I would definitely say I have the Sunday night blues, and even though I love my job.
Interesting. And Paul, does that resonate with you as well? How does your Sunday night look?
Yeah, so I find ironing quite mindful. Therapeutic. It's not entirely altruistic though, because the deal is that if I do the ironing on a Sunday night, I get to watch Sky Sports without getting moaned at. But ironing's quite a mindful practice, I find. So that takes my mind off work. Plus, I'm allowed to watch the football, which normally causes a row.
So do you iron whilst watching football?
Yes.
You're like the perfect man. This is incredible. Thank you. Can I just bring it back to the research, though, Ilka? How did this research come about? Why was it commissioned?
Well, I think, Kirsten, do you want to go first?
Of course.
And then I'll add my bit.
Well, based on, I suppose, my passion, I blog about it quite a bit. Matching Sunday Night Blues. Then I'd start talking to friends. Oh, I have the Sunday, and I was thinking, hold on, this might be something here. And I was really keen to see if we could validate it, but also research and get underneath what the causes are. And then, lucky enough, I was introduced to Ilka. We started talking after we were then going, oh yes, I have Sunday Night Blues. Oh yes, this is what it could be. And then it went from there, didn't it? So
And when we first started talking about it, I thought, what is so interesting about this? Because there has been research looking at how our mood fluctuates, and then we started looking at the literature, and I found findings that are a bit inconsistent. And people also say there are trends, but they're not big. And I now think that's because it's so individual. It's very hard to completely pin it down. It's not one thing everyone experiences in the same way, and some people don't have it. And for some also, when do you actually catch it? So, I mean, Kirsten, that afternoon, we talked to some people who said they have it from lunchtime. Some people said they had it early in their career and they made changes and they don't have it now. So it's a really individual experience.
But do you find that the majority of people that you spoke to experience it in some way or other, whether it's anxiety, anticipation, or even excitement?
So the people we interviewed said they all experienced it or they had experienced it. But then we said, we're talking about this topic, and but I think it's not. It's fairly common.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I just want a show of hands. Surely every single person in this room has experienced the Sunday Night Blues. If you can just put your hands up just for me, if you have. Anybody who... I'm loving it. You're like, no? Wow. I need to come and live with you. That's incredible. Why is this research important, Paul?
I think anything that makes people feel unhappy at work is something that we need to tackle. And talking to Kirsten earlier, when I've been telling people about coming to this event, every single person had a story to tell me and really wanted to share. And you couldn't get them to stop because they kept talking. And sharing much more than a way that they do any other question that you might ask them. So I think it is a big thing that's experienced by, as you can see, almost everybody. So anything that we can do to change people's attitude towards work, and instead of work having a dread attached to it, if we can change work to be something that's more exciting and pleasurable, then that's going to be good for productivity, which we need to improve in this country.
So really, you're saying the drive is towards making work, so having that feeling of anticipation and excitement to go into work on a Monday morning, rather than the nerves and the anxiety of having to go in.
Exactly. I think the phrase that kept coming to my head was sort of anticipatory anxiety.
Yeah.
As human beings, we don't like uncertainty. That's why we have economic forecasts and weather forecasts, even though they're always wrong. It gives us a feeling of certainty. Of security. And at the weekend you have that, but then you go into work the next week, what are my customers going to be like? What are my colleagues going to be like? What's my boss going to be like? There's all of these factors that you don't have control over. And then it can engender some anxious thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And for you, Kirsten, obviously you blog about this as well, and you and Ilka have been liaising long term about it. Was there anything around the research or your own experience that actually has surprised you from these findings?
I would say two things, and I've mentioned it already. I was so surprised you can love your job and have the Sunday Night Blues. And I think that's really interesting for us as leaders, employees, people professionals, back to Paul's point, because if there's something there, that means, are you turning up to work, you love your job, but you're not turning up to work in your best way because you're anxious, or you may not have slept the night before.
Well, can we just unpack that a little bit? Because again, I suspect that most of us watching and here today can identify with that. The excitement of wanting to see your colleagues and gossip and have a bit of fun and, you know, being with people. But then the dread of, oh, God. And also certain people that you don't want to see. What is that about? That we're excited, but we're anxious. Can we just look at that a little bit more? Why are we experiencing that, and what can we do about it?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, isn't there? There are some people want to come into work and they want to make a big change, and that's challenging and that's scary, and, you know, what reaction am I going to get? And that might be some of it. It might be it's something very difficult, I've not done it before, or there may be a piece of work you're like, I've done this before so many times, I really don't want to do it again, you're going to be asked. But I think what comes out of the research, which is, it's very personal. So Sunday night blues can be many different things. We said the time, it can be anxious, it can be excitement, it can be so many different things. And I think the important thing that coming from the research is recognising that there's not one size fits all in terms of how do we manage, eliminate, banish ourselves as people, but also as leaders. That's where I think the opportunity is in terms of what we can do about it and what we can do about that now.
Ultimately, is the Sunday night blues and the anticipation slash excitement slash anxiety, excuse me, is that to do with people? Is it less to do with work, and is it more to do with actually managing relationships within work? Does that come into play?
I mean, it sounds there's two things, certainly people, but also workload, volume.
Yes.
So I think, I would view from sort of, I suppose, a people professional, there's a whole cultural element that goes with working and all of those elements. But from the research, Ilka, what was your...
Yeah, I agree. I mean, what we saw in the qualitative findings initially, I mean, one thing you mentioned, Anna, is the excitement about seeing colleagues gossiping.
Yeah.
So that's actually a positive thing. If you
Yes.
can have that on a Monday morning, you're probably less likely to be anxious. So there seemed to be the work side. If you don't have that as a start on your Monday morning, but you already have a difficult meeting, let's say with a difficult client, that is going to, well, for a lot of people, affect their Sunday night. But the other thing is workload. Kirsten mentioned. Thinking about unfinished tasks and people who want to do a great job and then worry they won't get them done.
So are we saying that actually that employees might feel concerned about saying to their managers, I've got too much to do, I'm not coping? I mean, Paul, have you experienced this?
Yeah, I mean, earlier in my career, I worked in the social security offices in the 80s.
My God.
Yeah.
And you're alive?
And I'm alive,
in Scotland?
Yeah. In Glasgow, actually. And the volume of work that came in was huge.
Okay.
Huge. And the number of claims that came in. And people were just overwhelmed, and they had these targets to meet, and they were just impossible. And then sick absence went up, and people just checked out. So, I think workload volume, if it's not managed properly, can have a really negative impact on people's well-being. But it isn't good for the productivity of the organisation either. Because if people feel overwhelmed, they don't perform.
So, I mean, obviously, you referred back to when you were working in the 80s and felt absolutely overwhelmed by this as well, but you're seeing it now too.
I think it's probably worse now because I'm that old, that memory's before computers. That's how old I am. But now, where you're constantly on with your phone, and you're constantly getting messages, then that time to switch off and have your time is getting eroded and eroded and eroded and eroded.
I'm very keen, actually, to talk a little bit more about that, and particularly with you two as well, and to include people in the audience. There is something in that, isn't there? The fact that we are always on. I personally find it incredibly overwhelming that I get messages via email, text, WhatsApp, Instagram, phone calls. I can't cope with it. I find it really overwhelming. And then, of course, you get your managers saying, you've not responded to my WhatsApp, and the 10 emails that you've just got as well. So are we in an age at the moment where employees have got too many channels and they're being pulled in too many different directions. Do you recognise this, Kirsten?
I definitely. We've all had that experience. I know some of my team members are here. I think they would say the same thing. So I suppose the question is, what do we need to do as leaders? And this is really around being really back to purpose. What's your role? What are you looking to achieve? Let's come together and agree what those objectives are. But it goes also back to the research around how are we structuring our meetings? Because if we're having a Monday morning meeting of updates of how we're doing on our sales targets, for example, and there's all those different mediums of information, that's really stressful.
Yeah.
But if that meeting was later on in the day, because we need to know that information, giving people time to assess what's going on, what's the proper update, what's the prioritisation that needs to happen, that's a much better quality meeting, takes the stress out of the Monday,
Yes.
and potentially could reduce the banishing the Sunday night blues that you would have the day before. So I think that's where we need to work as leaders to cut through.
Okay, let's expand a little bit more on that then, because ultimately the hope with this research is that you're going to make a change at work. We're going to make it better for employees and make people happier and more productive. So what can leaders do? What will you be implementing, for example, at Channel 4?
Yeah, so we are going to be taking this preliminary research and testing it. So the first thing really is around, and we've talked about listening and having the conversation of asking, have you had the Sunday night blues? And that's not a negative question. That's just saying, hey, how was your weekend? How's your Sunday night? And that's a nice thing, I think, for leaders to really understand how are their teams, but also start to signal if something's getting on a weekly basis, something might be getting worse. That's a sign, potentially, as we're seeing the research, of somebody we might be burning out, and that's good to know to support early up front. So that's the first thing about making it common language. The second thing is really around meetings. Checking in the morning on the Monday and maybe checking out so you're not leaving any big unfinished or no new work that's been loaded in before the weekend. And then where possible as leaders, not sending lots of emails over the weekend, because I'm trying not to do it now. But importantly, so that people aren't open their inbox and they're seeing a flood of emails already, or knowing that's what they're going to come into, because that will potentially be a trigger for Sunday night. So those are the three things that we're going to be trialling in the channel to see how we can reduce it.
How possible is that to do with jobs? I'm thinking in terms of, for example, television production, but there are plenty other examples where actually you've got a real deadline and a limited amount of time and you have to work overtime and it is a very high pressure environment. Is that going to be practical? Will you be able to put in these sorts of steps in those kinds of environments?
I think yes, and also it's about having the conversation of being pragmatic.
Right.
Because all roles have different requirements. They might have peaks of when things need to be completed, whether from a production pace, and then when do you have that coming down. So having the conversation importantly with the team around how that's going to be. This is going to be a peak of work, then we're going to come off, and this is how we're going to manage it. That's the important thing, because it goes back to, it's got to be personal, it's got to be individualised.
Yes.
You can't do, this is what we're going to do across everywhere, because otherwise you haven't got a business. So it's the conversation and the personalisation.
Well, also just talking about boundaries as well, I do need to apologise to Scott, our producer, because I rang him at 9 o'clock last night. Just saying, so sorry, Scott, because I know that you were actually doing better things rather than having me on the phone. Boundaries sound very, very important as well in terms of managing people's happiness and contentment at work. Paul, can I ask you, obviously post-pandemic, now that we have flexible working, now that people want to work more from home, are they still experiencing the Sunday night blues?
I think for people who work in an office environment, it's definitely helped, because if you're not going into the commute into work on the Monday morning and you're on your own environment, you still got more of a feeling of control, you're in a safe space. So I think that's probably, for people that work in offices, that's lessened. But I'm always conscious when we have this debate, it seems to be always predicated on people who work in offices. The majority of people don't work in offices. And I was driving back from dropping my kids off at school yesterday, and I saw in the back of a bus an advert for bus drivers. There's a shortage of bus drivers at the moment. And the advert was, we will organise this job around about your personal life, and you can work any kind of shift pattern you want.
Wow.
Because they're so desperate to get people. So even in a job where you would have thought there isn't any flexibility, you know, you've got to be there for the shift patterns, because of the skill shortages there are, employers are having to think really differently about how they organise work and tailoring those shifts around the people's lives, rather than in the past it would have been driven by the employer.
How much of this is actually a cultural mindset shift that we've got to have? I mean, I came in this morning and I was chatting to my taxi driver, who was saying that he'd had a French guy in the back of the cab, and that obviously in France and in Paris, they're far more aware of their lifestyle balance, their work-life balance, whereas here we're not. So how much of this is going to be, actually, we've got to get our heads around respecting our personal life. And I think culturally, perhaps, that's going to be a struggle. I mean, Ilka, what would you say about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm German, and for instance, traditionally, when you look at large German companies, I just BMW once did a project. They used to have a strong ethos of you finish at a certain time, you start very early, you have a lunch break. People used to go for lunch, and I know it also depends a bit on which part of the business you are in, IT or is it the R&D, but I remember it made a big difference. There was a pattern and a rhythm to work, and people also had sometimes longer hours, but it wasn't the norm. And I think what we just discussed earlier, we seem to experience more and more of an erosion of these boundaries.
Why? I mean, do any of it, Paul? Man in the jacket with his hand up.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, I think it's because the way that we organise work was organised around about the Industrial Revolution and how with factories and things like that. And if you Google now future of work, you'll get lots and lots of academic papers coming up with lots of different theories. I think the bottom line is none of us really know. And the old model about how you organise work, I think the pandemic has thrown that completely up in the air.
Yeah.
We now have massive labour shortages, which is structural. There are more people leaving the labour market than entering it. So employers are having to think very differently about how they attract people to come and work for them. So the way that you tailor work around about the needs of the organisation and the needs of the individual, there's much more of a balance.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past it was pretty much dictated by the employer. So for me it's all up in the. I don't think anybody knows for sure where this is going to land over the long term. I think at the minute people are trying to work it out.
And are you finding any resistance from employers in terms of having to adopt this new psychology and change? Are you?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of employers, not within our community, but outside of our community, that you find are still saying you need to be in the office Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, because unless I can see you, I don't trust that you're doing your work.
In fairness, I am often doing my washing when I'm at it. I mean, there is something in that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, true.
Yeah, I could do your iron on a Sunday if you want. Yeah.
So you're still seeing some resistance in that?
But I think it comes down to this whole thing about a lack of feeling of control.
Yes.
So our belief at Invest in People is that you should manage on outcomes and outputs, not on inputs.
Yeah.
And it's too much of the old theory was around about managing hours and managing inputs. But really, at the end of the day, what do you want? You want people to achieve their objectives.
Exactly, and be happy.
And be happy doing that.
Is anybody here still experiencing that you have to be in the office, I want to be able to see you? Yeah, we've got a hand up at the back there. Okay, interesting. Ilka, can I ask you what the next stage of the research is?
So we want to really understand the mechanisms better. So what is it, because there are differences between people. Some people experience it more intensely than others, the Sunday night blues. Why is that? Then how does it actually affect their work and non-work life? And when is it something you maybe need to look for mental health support? When is it a kind of natural thing where you accept that you are going to be maybe a bit down on a Sunday, but Monday is going to be fine, versus being completely wound up,
Yeah.
very stressed, can't sleep on a Monday. And that will then help us to develop the tools further for employees and the managers.
Of course, if you do need mental health support, we know we're in a mental health crisis at the moment. Often that there aren't enough resources or avenues to go down to get that mental health support. I know that Channel 4, you're very good, aren't you, with the sort of employee support schemes and mental health. But if you're a freelance, for example, I'm freelance, there is nowhere to go unless you pursue that yourself. So that's interesting to hear that how do you distinguish between what's normal and what actually then needs some kind of intervention. Can I ask all of you your one top tip for everybody here and everybody watching online in terms of what they can do to banish that anxiety or the Sunday night blues? What would you suggest? Ilka, I can see that your mind is spinning away there. I'm going to go to Paul first.
So other than ironing, I think that when I speak to employers about this, if you've got £1 to invest in anything, invest it in your managers, because your managers are the people who look after your staff, and if you can support them to be the best that they can be, they're more able then to look after your staff, and they can create the conditions where people are going to be more happy to come into work. So that would always be my starting point.
So invest well in your managers.
Yeah, we've got 2 million accidental managers in the UK.
Yeah.
That's people that were put into management positions and not trained to do it.
Yes.
So we think you wouldn't let anybody, drive a bus or be an engineer without being trained, but we let anybody be a manager.
Well, in a way, it's almost parenting, isn't it?
Is, yeah.
It's parenting. I mean, I think that often with the Sunday Night Blues, I think this must come back to when we were children, and we were anxious about going to school in the morning, being bollocked by your teacher or not having done your homework or whatever. I think a lot of it goes back to being 10. So it makes sense to me that investing well in your managers, because it's kind of a parenting role.
Yeah. And I think there's more pressure on managers now than there's ever been. They're having to cope with remote working, flexible working, increasing demands, all the technology. I think being a manager now is one of the toughest jobs anybody can have, and I don't think they get enough support.
Absolutely. Kirsten, what would you say? What's your top tip
My
for
top tip?
banishing the Sunday
Well,
night blues?
Very simply, stop and listen.
Oh.
And that's first around yourself. If you're feeling anxious and you're running a team, imagine what your team may be going through. So just to stop and unpack that and see if there's any changes that you need to make.
So it's almost like being a sort of an air hostess on a plane. You know when they say if the plane's going down or you think it's going down, look to the air hostesses, look to the cabin crew. And if they're fine, then actually the plane is fine. So managers need to kind of like have that sort of, it's all fine. So look to yourself first and sort of manage.
Yourself first, but I think it's important to be authentic, because
Yes.
if you're putting that mask on, then you're not opening it out.
Yes.
But what are you anxious about, and do something about it, because I guarantee you'll be supporting other people in the organisation.
Interesting. And Ilka, what's your top tip?
So for managers, as Kirsten mentioned, having the discussion about the Monday mornings and Friday afternoons and changing just talking with the
basically
teams
3-day
about
week.
it. I'm sure everyone loves it.
I think we should advocate for the 3-day week. I love that. So Monday morning, ease people in slowly. Friday afternoon, don't bother. So basically it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, work. This sounds brilliant. I'm loving this. Thank you very much. I am aware that we are on 10:57, folks. We've got about 10 minutes left for Q&A. I'm hoping that you're all burning with questions about your own mental health and work-life balance. That includes people watching online as well. We want your questions. Man in the pink sweatshirt, what would you like to ask?
Thank you. Hi, Rob Stevenson. I'm the founder of FormScore, which is a people analytics tool for managers that addresses a lot of this stuff. And Paul, I also do the ironing on a Sunday evening. I agree, it's a top tip. So I don't know who said this, but there's a quote about let's stop trying to fix the people and start trying to fix work. And we've heard a lot about workload and work stress, and those are the two most common factors that are tagged in our analytics solution as well. My question, and I'm probably directing it to you, Kirsten, and it's a tough one, is how can we convince people like the CFO, the CEO, of the importance of this stuff, because for me, a lot of it is around trying to do more with less and not properly resourcing our businesses. And secondary question, how important is data to convince them of the case?
That's a really good question.
Thank you.
And moving on. No, that's a brilliant question. I personally couldn't agree more, and I don't. I'm desperate to ask you guys as well. But it is impossible, isn't it, that when you go to the very top of the tree, trying to get the CEO, the chairman, whoever, to listen to the fact that we need this work-life balance, we need to change the culture within work. Very, very difficult indeed. Who wants to go there first? Come on then, Kirsten.
The way you say this is a hard question. So I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way, if I may. So the first thing, if we're saying about convincing the purse string holders, and Paul, this goes back to the conversation we were having earlier today, is asking them, do they have the Sunday night blues? And I know that might sound quite a basic thing, but it opens up a question to get people into how are you feeling, and actually what's that experience you're having that maybe you are not at being your best, and therefore are you doing your best work? And just opening up that conversation, I think, then starts to say why this is so important, as Paul said, from an economic perspective, for the country, for the organisation and for the individual. Data, I think, is key at the moment, absolutely, which is one of the reasons why I was desperate to meet Ilka, because if you talk about Sunday night blues, it can be quite woolly. Now we're starting to get data which is saying it's validated and here are some of the causes and the reasons that we should be doing it. So it's absolutely ongoing. That's how I would start to answer that quite big question.
So ask the question first, how are you feeling? And then I've got some data to back it up. Sounds like the answer if you're dealing with difficult bosses effectively. Paul, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I think CFOs and CEOs are worried about productivity.
Yeah.
And if people aren't feeling at their best, they're not going to be productive. And if we can work with Exeter Uni and Ilka to give us some hard data to back up the intuitive, because you intuitively know that there's something here, and the data to back that up, then those two things combined is a really powerful argument.
Lovely. Any other question? Yes. Hello.
Hi, my name's Catherine. I'm from Halcyon. We're a coaching business. Just building on Rob's point, is this not a systemic problem that we have over-financialised work? And because of that, the focus on profit only, and short-term financial decision-making is actually what needs to change?
Ooh. Rarely am I stumped. I'm going to pass that on to Paul.
I think that's a hospital pass. I think that's that's known as. I think in many ways, I think you're right. We're fortunate. We're a not-for-profit organisation. We're commercial, but we don't have shareholders that are looking for a dividend. So what that means for us is that everything that we do is about fulfilling our purpose. That's what drives us, and our purpose is grounded in trying to make society better and workplaces better. So we're in quite a fortunate position, I guess, that we've not got those other pressures. So we can think a bit more long-term. But I do think that if we could take that more of a purpose-driven mindset into the commercial world, we would have more sustainable businesses for the long term.
Yes.
Rather than, every quarterly results and you've got to hit a certain number and making short-term decisions that aren't necessarily always for the long-term good. That's going to take a huge cultural change.
So, I mean, again,
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you. Kirsten, what would you, I mean, obviously working with Channel 4 as well, that there's going to be that tension. How do we convince people who are concerned about budgets and bottom line that actually the work-life balance is crucial and it can't just be about profit?
Well, the good news, I believe, is if you go back 10 years, that would be a very different conversation in terms of was culture important, what does culture mean, work-life balance. If we now fast forward to 10 years now, people understand the importance of culture from a commercial perspective, as you said, for the long term, which I think, so that's a good thing. Where we are now potentially going to be challenged when we're into short term and we're looking at profit is to go back to what is our purpose, bringing everyone back around to that. And the energy and time spent in that will convert into pounds, I believe. And that's the energy that we need to do. Because otherwise, why am I going to work really hard if I don't really believe in what my organisation's doing, or it's changed tactics that I don't believe in? Those are the things that we really should be focusing on. So I think there's an opportunity here.
So, funnily enough, also I've come up with an answer as well. I was part of an International Women's Day lunch the other day with Channel 4. And in fact, I think it was your head of diversity and inclusivity who was saying that she's now making a drive for equity at work. So it's no longer just about inclusion, it's no longer just about equality, that we're now moving into equity. So in other words, that employees should have some kind of stake in what is happening at work, some kind of say and stake. So I wonder whether that's quite an interesting thing to think about as well, in terms of if you really want people to invest in their work, they need to feel as though they have a stake in it as well. I think you'll find that was an amazing answer.
To your point, I was very interested. No, it's a very good point building on that. It is about emotion.
Yeah.
Emotions give us energy, or they deplete our energy.
Yes.
And so if you're feeling depleted and you start Monday and you're on a low, that's a problem.
And that you feel you've got no stake in the business anyway.
Because you've got no stake in the business.
Yeah.
And because I don't believe I can change anything around here.
And I'm not being listened to.
And no one's listening.
It's just a personal thing between you and me. I'll have a mini therapy. Okay, any more questions, please? Sure. Oh, yeah, I love this. Lady in the green jumper at the front.
Thank you. It's Beth from Investors in People. So I'm really interested, thank you for everything, by the way, it's been fascinating. I'm interested in the really positive outcomes that have come out recently regarding the 4-day working week. And I wondered whether you've noticed or you've seen any interaction between that and whether that helps with Sunday Note or whatever night it is, blues.
4-day working week, gang. What are we saying? Ilka, I mean, you're going for a 3-day working week.
That was suggested to the University of Exeter, actually. Well, I think one thing it could de-stretch this whole kind of, very compressed time that the activities people squeeze into their weekends. So one outcome could be that you have less of a blues. One thing I would take away from this research to be mindful about implementing the 4-day week is, however, that emails and unfinished tasks don't bleed into the 5th free day. I think that to me is a potential risk.
So we're talking about workload again. It doesn't matter how many days you've got. Ultimately, the workload stays the same. So it's inevitably going to bleed into your free time.
Well, it needs to be rearranged. I know there's data coming out where experiments have been run with the reduced number of hours, same pay, but same level of productivity.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting to see how that works and whether that will actually stay or whether there is again then a tendency to say, yeah, okay, can we increase the productivity goal a little bit so it bleeds into the 5th day.
Yeah. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it was 70 companies were involved in a pilot for this, and I think virtually all of them are going to carry on with it, which is...
With the 4-day?
Yeah. Which I was actually quite surprised about. I thought there would be a bigger drop-off than that. So there is definitely something in it. So there's something called Parkinson's Law, where the work expands to the time available. So, if you can do it in 3 days at a more intense level, and then you get the payback of having 4 days off, then, it does seem... It's early days, but there does seem to be working.
At all? I mean, come on.
Well,
I feel that this is where we're going. Why bother?
Do you know what? With the advances in technology and ChatGPT and all of that, these things are at the early stages, but they're going to grow exponentially. So we have to think 15, 20 years out. Technology is going to eat away a lot of very well-paid jobs like lawyers, doctors, and all of that. technology could quite easily take over those jobs in the future. So
Interesting.
what is our purpose? What are we here for? Because we've been hunter-gatherers trying to bring money in. What if the wealth is created in a different way? And then
What are we here for?
Yeah.
What are we here for? Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Yes, a young man in a smart jumper with his hand up.
Hi there, Chris here from Avanade, a tech consultancy, and I'm lucky enough to do a 4-day week as well. So many of my colleagues might be in Seattle or Australia, because we're all over the place. How does this type of discussion around the Sunday night blues apply when you might have people wanting to message you at 9 o'clock at night, or where maybe their work week doesn't align with ours?
Ooh. Yeah, that's a nightmare for you. Move jobs? Thank you.
I wonder if it goes back to this is about personalisation and reality on there as well. I mean, I don't think we're that powerful. We can start changing time zones and get everyone to work on the same. That would be interesting. But I think it's around, in those global situations, having the boundaries set around, okay, I can take a call on a Sunday night if that's what you want to do, because I'm going to have my Monday, or however it is. So it goes back, I think, about having the conversation around what's going to work for the various parties, and in a way come to agreement, because everyone's got different needs, haven't they? So that's, I think, the starting point. So really, what is that openness in that system, and also having the opportunity to say, okay, we tried it for a couple of months, it's really not where I need to now have another conversation. So that's where I would go on from a global perspective. But I do think there's more research to be done. I know we've talked about that whole global piece as well, which I know is something you're thinking about.
I think expectations is a big thing. So discussing within such a team, as you said, what are we expecting? Are you supposed to be online all the time if you work with people in Australia and the US? Or what are your days where you maybe take the Australian colleagues' calls? I think that would already make a big difference. It's lack of clarity is also something that typically stresses people out.
Yeah. Does that sound manageable? Is that a conversation you could have at work?
It does. I was just interested in the research. I know a lot of the way in which we're trying to combat it is managing through outcomes rather than by hours. So yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from Dan? Yes, hello.
Hi, I'm Jodie. I'm head of people for a technology consultancy. Just a question around mental health and general well-being. As head of people and sitting on the senior leadership team, I'm responsible for making sure that we drive a lot of these strategies around mental health and well-being from the top down. And it's really important, obviously, to get that senior leadership level buy-in and sort of drive that accountability downwards. My challenge, I find, is that I don't get much engagement from that senior level of the business around things like, for example, we recently rolled out a health check survey. The majority of the people that completed it were sort of low to mid-management. You go upwards from there, they don't really engage with it. So we're expecting them to lead by example, but what can we do to create a culture for more senior levels of the business to feel like they've got somewhere to go and we bring them into that?
That's a really good question again, and we touched on this earlier on, didn't we, in terms of how do we engage the very top level management in what it is that we're all and you're trying to do. Kirsten, what do you think?
I would say two things. One is around having that conversation with that senior team, obviously in a way that people feel comfortable with, to be open, because it starts the conversation of, it gets people thinking about it themselves, and then there will be a trickle outside of it. I think the other, given that we have got multi-generations in our organisations at the moment, and different views and experiences of being open around mental wellness. And I think some reverse mentoring is sometimes quite powerful, because a senior manager will then start to go, oh, I didn't realise, okay, it's right in front of me, of how this is impacting someone. And that can be very, very powerful as well. And obviously managing confidentiality, then you've got another good conversation going on, then you're starting to see the results, and now I need to do something. So those are sort of the two cultural pieces about having the right conversations, and so it's got real meaning behind it.
Does that sound manageable?
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah.
Does anybody else experience that kind of resistance from very top level management in terms of, yeah, you're nodding, the two girls there, yeah, that sort of resistance when it comes to, look, we need to try and change the culture of the workplace to accept mental health and well-being within the workplace. There is that resistance. Very interesting. Paul, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think what Kirsten said there was spot on.
Yeah.
I haven't got anything more to add.
Okay. Any other questions, please? Particularly, I'm keen to hear from anybody online that's still watching. Do we have some questions that have come in? I think Peter at the back. No? All done? Any other questions? Come on, there's got to be one more. I can feel there's something. Yes! Lady in the black polo neck.
Hi, I'm Sarah from Channel 4.
Hi.
I'm just quite curious, and the research might talk about this later. Is there a pattern of people experiencing the Sunday night blues more than others? So, for instance, women of a certain age, or Gen Zs or whatever, you know, is there a pattern between who experiences it worse, or even at seniority? So the more senior you get, do you find you get that Sunday night blues more than if you're more junior in a role? I don't know if you know yet, but I was just quite curious. I was just thinking, is there patterns in this research?
So in terms of the demographics, what are we saying?
So they're great questions. So we are going to look into that. So we haven't got the data yet to unpick that. But initial findings show, for instance, talking to people who've been very experienced, have had a long career, sometimes change their approach. So my hunch is there would be differences.
So watch this space, basically, with that. Thank you. I am very conscious of the time. It's 11:15, so we're out of time for the questions. So firstly, can I just say a big thank you? Can you join me in saying a big thank you to our panel, Ilka, Kirsten and Paul. Thank you very much. I, along with you all, really appreciate your expertise in bringing this research to light. So thank you. There's a lot more to talk about. If you still have the time, then we're going to invite you to move back out into the foyer where you can pester and stalk Ilka, Kirsten and Paul to talk more about how we can improve well-being at work. And also keep an eye on your inboxes as well, because Ilka is looking for more people to take part in the next stage of research. And in fact, maybe that could include the demographics that we're talking about as well. What kind of people are more prone to the Sunday night blues? So keep an eye open for that. And other than that, thank you very much indeed to the people watching online and also to all of you here. Thank you for your time today.